pleasure of moderating this panel. We will have 3 speakers. We will do all 3 speakers consecutively, and the remaining time will be for discussion. This way we can ensure that everybody can get through their talk without rushing. So our first speaker today, according to the program, Professor Rob Stone, or Robert, maybe, if you want to be formal, no?
Rob.
Robert?
Just Rob.
Who's Emeritus Professor of Film Studies at the University of Birmingham. And his work is on the dynamics of world cinema, American independent cinema, Hispanic cinema, with an emphasis on relations between aesthetics, politics, and philosophy. So it's very broadly learned and of interest. He has published too many books for me to share with you, which is nice. It's always good to publish stuff. He is also a filmmaker and a video essayist. I guess that is short form film. Is that fair to say?
It's videographic criticism for short film.
I see. Short and succinct, yeah. His latest monograph is entitled Imagined Life, American Independent Cinema and Transcendentalism, which will be published by Edinburgh University Press this year. Is it out already?
No, November.
November. So all of you should buy it and do your Amazon reviews or whatnot, and 5 stars. So let's welcome Professor Robson.
Okay, thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Kiki, of course, and her team as well for this fascinating day. It's already proven to be really, really interesting. So, with this paper, as David's mentioned, what I'm doing is I'm drawing on my forthcoming book, which comes out in November, which is called Imagined Life, American Independent Cinema and Transcendentalism. And I'm doing so in order to explore some of the differences between the thesis of real life, the antithesis of an imagined life, and the synthesis of a filmed one. I'll do this today by considering the impact of Daoism on Transcendentalism, and then the impact of Transcendentalism on American independent cinema. Now, this is a thread that runs through the book. It's not a dominant part of the book, but it is a key thread. So the imagined life is what we're always moving towards. While our lives are flowing, they are incomplete. And our immersion makes a higher view of their shape and meaning elusive. When we imagine our lives, however, our frames of reference shift, and we see them, our lives, from beyond the past, present, and future as a complete process leading to what might be called transcendence. This is not a metaphysical leap for the Transcendentalists. It's a hard scrabble and studious climb towards glimpses of what Emerson called perfection, even though that perfection might be unreachable. Now, in my book, I argue that closing the gap between the life we live and the one we imagine is the aim of Transcendentalism. And it's also the forte of American independent cinema. So an imagined life is therefore also a film that is congruent with Transcendentalism, one that shows us everydayness proportionate to eternity, which is also congruent with Daoism. So films that pay attention to this everydayness invite us to reflect upon our own capacity for transcendence, often by means of routines, turning into rituals, which is a process that entails and rewards the search for meaning beyond our sense and our senses. Furthermore, the importance of the imagined life is that it is not just our own. Imagination is key to empathy too, of course, which depends upon our imagining the lives of others and sensing for ourselves how we might feel to be in their shoes and look through their eyes. And this is where film comes in. This is where film can help. Because by imagining those lives for us, those of other cultures, ethnicities, genders, those lived under different economic conditions in other times and places, well, it creates lives with which we might empathize. In sum, as the key transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, this manner of looking at things transfers every object in nature from an independent and anomalous position without there into the consciousness. So Emerson led the 19th century New England group of Transcendentalists, along with Henry David Thoreau and Margaret Fuller and others like Bronson Alcott and many people associated with them. The Transcendentalists of the early 19th century subscribed to an idealistic philosophy, one that was based upon an intuitive and imaginative understanding of the importance of active souls, the importance of interconnectedness with nature, the importance of divine energy, and the transformation of the knowledge and experience of the individual into self-reliance and ultimately moral imperatives, which the Transcendentalists were obliged to act upon. These weren't abstract ideas, these were practical endeavors. Now, Daoism, which reached America in the backwash from the European colonial presence in Asia, had a great impact on Transcendentalism as a corrective to the centuries-long dominion of Christianity in the West, according to Hodder, one of the experts on Transcendentalists. Indeed, Ralph Waldo Emerson would shock Harvard's Divinity School with his address in 1838 when he proclaimed Europe has always owed to Oriental genius its divine impulses. And for that phrase and several others, he was expelled from Harvard. Thoreau, too, was a confirmed exponent of the perennial wisdom that he found illustrated in Asian scriptures. And his efforts at conjoining Transcendentalism with Daoism fed into his own creative practice of working hard towards an imagined life in ways that he deemed essential to the evolution of individualism and Emersonian perfectionism. So in my book, what I do is I try to trace the dialectic of Transcendentalist and Daoist beliefs that were examined by Emerson, Thoreau, and Fuller. And in the book, I argue that their synthesis is evident in the themes and creative praxis of recent American independent film. So over 150 years later, I argue that there's been a kind of a legacy working through other forms as well, but how it comes through in American independent cinema. One of the reasons that's problematic, and there are many, is that even at its most cohesive peak, Transcendentalism was not monolithic. So even a retrospective bundling of a kind of a holistic manifesto for the group lacks the coherence of its greater parts, such as we see here, Fuller's Manifesto, Woman in the 19th Century, Emerson's great essay, Nature, Thoreau's Walden, and of course Thoreau's essay on civil disobedience, which is originally titled Resistance to Civil Government. Now, moving beyond its origins in Unitarianism, the Christian theological movement that holds that God is a single entity, Transcendentalism embraced post-Kantian philosophical and social thought, being particularly responsive to how it was illustrated in the works of Coleridge and Locke, as well as, crucially, Hindu and Daoist scriptures. What the Transcendentalists made of Daoist texts had a profound influence on American thought. It inspired the writers of the Beat movement, such as Jack Kerouac. It inspired the writers of the New Journalism, like Tom Wolfe and Joan Didion. And, as I contend in the book, it also inspires American independent cinema too. To backtrack just a little, access to Daoist writings was of course due to the European colonial presence in Asia, particularly that of the British Empire, which resulted in translations feeding back to inspire a period of European cultural rebirth that was sustained by the Transcendentalists in the US after independence, after the Revolutionary War. So the Transcendentalists first looked to Asian religions as evidence. What they provided was evidence of the transcendental unity of all religions. And this was a founding factor in the concept of Transcendentalism. Gradually, however, Emerson, Thoreau, and others like Amos Bronson Alcott, who was Louisa May's father, came to recognize and enthuse about the importance of Daoist ideas so much that by the time Thoreau moved to Walden Pond in 1845, he was a confirmed exponent of the perennial wisdom that he found illustrated in Asian scriptures. Of special interest to Thoreau was the doctrine of disinterested action and karma, which underpins his ideas on civil disobedience. He's quite explicit on the influence. His efforts at conjoining Transcendentalism with Buddhism inspired as well his own translations. He translated from French parts of the venerated Lotus Sutra for publication in the Transcendentalist journal The Dial, and it also inspired the creative practice of his own spiritual framework for hard work at Walden Pond, where he stayed for just over 2 years. On his death, Thoreau bequeathed his entire library to Bronson Alcott, and Alcott went on to sponsor the first American edition of Edwin Arnold's Light of Asia in 1878, which is a poetic rendering of the life of Buddha that greatly influenced Walt Whitman. Now, although it's arguable whether the transcendental discourse ever really escaped Orientalism and the limitations of translation, it would persist nonetheless. It flowered, of course, alongside the writers like Kerouac and the New Journalism. It flowered in the hippie movement, as well as in the writings, as I've said, of the Beats, New Journalism, and, as I insist, American independent cinema. So this is particularly evident in films that represent routines becoming rituals, those that offer the interplay between work and meditation and the consequent aesthetic representation of these things. Now, Thoreau had already recognized that the routine of Buddhist practice was conducive to transcendence, holding that, as he said, Oriental philosophy approaches easily loftier themes than Western philosophers who have not conceived of the significance of contemplation in their sense. However, Thoreau never renounced the moral imperative of hard work for meditation. He believed that the minimalist Buddhist routine is a practice for focusing on the divine, but it's one that excludes distractions. Right or wrong, that's what he believed. It excluded distractions from meditation. Whereas Transcendentalism upholds the maximalist routine of personal industry as something that's integral to the evolution of individualism towards this notion of Emersonian perfectionism. So what Thoreau was doing was separating his unwaged labour from capitalism. He separated his hard work from the notion of work hard with the exclusive aim of making money. And instead what he does is he embraces hard work as a meditative process, which he explains in his work Walden. This idea, I argue, comes down to us in films such as Ramin Barani's Man Push Cart, in which the detailing of Ahmed's daily effort to run a food cart in downtown Manhattan is an investment in self-reliance and self-respect on the way to self-determination. On first viewing, you might think Man Push Cart also subscribes to the American dream of an immigrant who is trying to make money in Manhattan. But the film really holds that people who work hard can create their own opportunities to succeed. So there's an overlap with the cliche of the American dream. It's just that the difference is, as Man Push Cart reveals, that the diversion of this ethos towards an exclusive focus on profit skews work away from any moral imperative and demotes, even demolishes, the objective of a spiritual reckoning. So Ahmed seems to have a spiritual purpose, a moral objective in mind, but when he gets distracted by profit, his moral imperative collapses. So the idea of work routines turning into creative rituals and culminating thereby in transcendence is actually common to many American independent films. In Slacker, the everyday routine is based around creative rituals that oppose the surrender of physical and mental health to capitalist endeavour. In Kevin Smith Clark's, the drudgery of working in a convenience store is relieved by philosophical debate and inquiry. In Jim Jarmusch's Patterson, a bus driver uses his daily bus route to inspire his poetry. In Short Term 12, counsellors use the stable routine of a care home for adolescents to release and nurture the trauma and creative impulses of their charges. And in Kelly Reichardt's Showing Up, Lizzie, played by Michelle Williams, is an artist whose art is a process that juxtaposes her creative frustrations with her gradual acceptance of her own flaws, those of her family, and ultimately of the art that she produces too. Now, all of these characters in American independent cinema align quite neatly with Thoreau, who acknowledges that there is nothing, not even crime, more opposed to poetry, to philosophy, aye, to life itself, than this incessant business, by which he means commerce, profit-making. He doesn't mean hard work. Like them, Thoreau realizes that he cannot move from meditation to transcendence without doing repetitive daily labor beforehand. The routine becomes the ritual. Indeed, Thoreau deemed the shortcut to divinity of reciting a prayer also irrelevant to being in the world. Instead, what Thoreau did was to dedicate himself to the routines becoming rituals of making bread, studying the lake, reading, cleaning, listening, tending his bean field, all of which are described in great detail in Walden. Crucially, the tasks that he describes are not chores. Actually, what they are is kind of like prayers in praxis. For the most part, I minded not how the hours went, he wrote. No matter how mundane, the chores are purposeful, meaningful, and dedicated to the pursuit of higher meaning. As he wrote, follow your genius closely enough, and it will not fail to show you a fresh prospect every hour. Housework was a pleasant pastime, and my meditations were almost uninterrupted. So from the slog of man-push-cart to the circadian rhythms of Slacker, from the daily grind of Clark's to the groove of Patterson, from the purposeful service of short-term 12 to the creative vocation of showing up, routine is a structuring principle that makes sense of consecutive days, aspiring to a ritual that promises transcendence by focusing on the everyday of ordinary Americans, and what I call in the book, I needed a new term for it, the busy minimalism of American independent cinema. Now, busy minimalism is of course a dialectic on purpose. It's a juxtaposition of the tropes, even cliches, of rapid editing in American independent cinema and long takes in kind of world cinema, art house movies. This is actually clarified by Transcendentalism's indebtedness to Immanuel Kant's binding ideas on aesthetics and creative judgment. And this is what leads me to kind of a Transcendentalist toolkit in order to understand how American independent films respond to and illustrate Transcendentalist ideas. Kant's deliberations on aesthetics invoke a synthesis of experience and reflection, which promises to find the universal in the particular and thereby enable ideas of morality and judgment. However, because aesthetics have mutable meanings that are consolidated by repetition and reflection, Beatrice Longuenesse identifies what she calls the actualization of the capacity to judge in relation to sensory perceptions. Longuenesse's understanding underpins the aesthetics and purpose of what I call busy minimalism, which realizes the imagined life on and as film by means of techniques that gain meaning through repetition, which lead to routine, which results in their ritual deployment in American independent cinema. So, for example, the toolkit I mentioned of busy minimalism includes the juxtaposition of subjective shots with objective shots. And the first of these, the subjective, are often rendered by handheld camera. The juxtaposition that's created is a dialogue, therefore, between a sense of empirical experience and the context in which that empirical experience takes place. Cutting, editing, juxtaposing these shots means that the thesis of subjective shots is juxtaposed with the antithesis of objective ones, and thereby signals a Hegelian dialectic in pursuit of a synthesis. That which the Transcendentalist Margaret Fuller described as a ravishing harmony. It's a wonderful phrase. This harmonious synthesis is both empirical and spiritual. It's both human and divine. It's both near, low and familiar, and it's also beyond, exalted and uncanny. And film, I argue, is the ideal medium for this dialectical process because it allows for the flow and juxtaposition of long and wide fixed objective shots with handheld subjective ones and of course close-ups in the editing, all the unique aspects of film as an art form. So rather than fracture meaning, this juxtaposition of subjective and objective shots enables a gradual suturing of empirical and phenomenological details of experience, leading to both a reasoned contextualization and, crucially, a spiritual overview. Furthermore, the filming and the editing of this juxtaposition also suggests a mode of cinematic experience grounded in breathing, and therefore the meditative state of being in the world. So drawing from Daoist philosophy, and I have Kiki to thank for this, having met her in a conference in Portsmouth and having discussed this idea, Kiki calls for attention to, quoting, an often overlooked mode of engagement through chi, vital energy, and breathing, wherein the juxtaposition of subjective handheld shots with objective fixed wide-angle shots seeks a synthesis that's akin to breathing. In effect, therefore, Transcendentalism adds an American imperative, breathe in, tense up, to the handheld subjective shots that is juxtaposed with Asian meditative practice, breathe out, in the wide-angle fixed shots. This filming and editing strategy approaches the synthesis of Transcendentalism and Daoist beliefs, the kind sought by Emerson and Thoreau. As we breathe in, not without tension, amongst the clutter of busy minimalism, and we breathe out, with relief perhaps, finding our place in the cosmos. The dialogue between the concept or thesis of the empirical ego that comes from experience creates a harmonious overlap in Chloe Zhao's first three films of Lakotan, Transcendentalist and Buddhist beliefs, Songs My Brothers Taught Me, The Rider, Nomadland, and also in her latest film, Hamlet 2. Each of these films exalts and subordinates individualism by means of what Emerson declares is the power of me as something being subject to the eternal question, am I in harmony with myself? This Daoist questioning is fundamental for Thoreau too, who deemed it absolutely foundational to the extent that, quoting him, he dreamed of reviving ancient Oriental wisdom in the modern world. That said, in the US context, many of the films are forced to ask a crucial question. What if the way to the imagined life is blocked? Now, in Sorry Baby, a consequence for Agnes, played by Ava Victor, of being raped by her thesis supervisor at a Massachusetts university is how the trauma occludes her imagined life. I don't see it, she says, like in my head. I don't see it. I don't see myself settling down or having kids. I don't see myself. Estranged from the catalyst of interconnectedness that's essential to recovery, Agnes only begins to recoup her imagined life when she meets a stray kitten. Picking it up, she instantly exclaims, "Ah, I love you," before presenting her gambit of interconnectedness to her housemate. "I got a cat," she says, and the housemate wisely answers, "Whatever you need." The same question of how to sustain an imagined life without interconnectedness hangs like grief over many films in which civil rights and feminist concerns are mired in discrimination and sexist oppression. What hope is left when the imagined life is occluded or denied? This is the key question, I think, in American independent cinema. As for Socrates' unexamined life, is the unimagined life simply not worth living? In answer to this question, Chloe Zhao's The Rider presents a dialectic between nature and human that is mediated by her camera, by which she juxtaposes what I've tried to describe. She juxtaposes wide, long shots of the natural landscape with handheld shots of the character Brady and his interventions, how he sees this landscape. If you haven't seen the film, it's after a terrible accident. Brady is ordered to stop riding rodeo by his doctors. So the narrative of The Rider presents an end to his imagined life. But Brady's transcendence is nevertheless signposted by Chloe Zhao's synthesis of the aforementioned dialectic, juxtaposing widescreen images of landscapes that promise the sublime, with a handheld camera work that intervenes when Brady is showing his subjectivity, that signals his human intervention. At dawn, for example, Brady rises and stands in the liminal space of a doorway as a portal between domesticity and wildness that features in Zhao's Nomadland and Hamlet 2. However, instead of cutting to a static wide long shot of a spectacular landscape, the handheld camera follows Brady into it. and the jolting follow shot that goes with him as he approaches his horse. The ensuing close-ups of the man and the horse thus suggest a synthesis of Transcendentalist and Daoist beliefs and praxes, building on the juxtaposition of handheld subjective shots, breathe in, and wide-angle objective shots, breathe out, until the breathing of the editing calms in the synthesis of shots that are both handheld and wide-angle. This is the same ancient wisdom that was pursued by Thoreau, who realized that to truly renew this ancient spiritual wisdom, he must find a way to live it. He must attempt to be a Brahman, to be awakened, Buddha. In Nomadland 2, the spiritual dialectic that resides in the eternal tension between humans and nature plays out in the juxtaposition of close-ups of Francis McDormand's expressive features, with wide-angle shots of ancient landscapes moving imperceptibly through time. Indeed, this juxtaposition creates a meditative state, blending Transcendentalism and Daoism, in which synthesis, and so transcendence, is reached by the juxtaposition of handheld subjective follow shots, breathe in, and wide-angle objective shots of landscapes, breathe out, which add up to a calming sense of being in the world. In Fern's case, a meaningful life, an imagined one. So the maximalist landscape shots in Nomadland are not mere backdrops to Fern's activities. What they are is essentially a contextualization of her minimalist endeavor. As for Thoreau and his leaning in, breathing in to study nature, and standing back, breathing out to cogitate upon its meaning, Chloe Zhao creates a dialectic that results in the synthesis of Fern's understanding that she's not just traveling through modern-day America, she's also trespassing on ancient lands while making her way into new worlds too. Indeed, Nomadland reveals that, moving through the evolving cosmos, Fern's subjectivity is at the center of a plethora of temporal loops at different speeds and diameters that circulate in the film, creating a circular motif. At the center is her daily routine, which is conveyed by busy minimalism in flurries of handheld shots that follow her everyday chores. Thus, the cosmic messaging of an insistent circular motif functions at an intimate level too, calling Fern's attention to the pan in which she stirs her soup, for example, the round wheel that has to be replaced on her van, the round plates that are smashed and which she tries to glue back together, all of them symbolizing circularity and renewal on the way to transcendence. Outside these circles are her non-daily but repeating activities like cutting her hair, and her migratory return to specific locations at certain times and seasons of repeating years, such as the Amazon warehouse with its eternally looping conveyor belts. The open road that she follows is composed of repeating circles too. It's never straight. Zhao often films her driving ahead as she turns around a corner, not going straight ahead. So the open road is composed of repeating circles, with clusters of near identical gas stations and diners too, that widen into towns that are encircling cycles of industry, boom and bust. Widening further, Nomadland considers the life cycle of humans and aligns these with the circuition of swallows, solar cycles, the infinite whirring of the universe and the endless turning of time. Nomadland suggests, moreover, that the migratory impulse of these modern nomads is revived from prehistory, along with a life-size brontosaurus statue on the roadside that returns as the vehicles that Fern thinks look just like dinosaurs. So in conclusion, from dinosaurs roaming South Dakota to vehicles powered by fossil fuels is just a blink for the cosmos. Fern's urge to mesh with nature and the universe echoes that of Thoreau, who wrote, "If it were sublime, to know it by experience," but suggests that even if it were not subjectively sublime, we should know it by experience too, as long as that experience is authentic. Fern's transcendence at the end of Nomadland results from suffering, through bereavement, grief, and displacement. but also understanding that these are natural cycles that exist and have meaning far beyond a life that we or her might find economically gratifying, socially acceptable, and aesthetically pleasing. The final shot of Nomadland is a fern driving away towards a truth that's an always there. It's a truth, though, that's beyond our material reality. It's always going to be around the next bend. It's always going to be over the next hill. And as befits the circular motif of the film, this is actually not the end of the film, but its center. It's the midpoint between knowing nothing and knowing we know nothing. Okay, thank you.